This is your World War III update, the condensed version, because silly me, I've spent 45 minutes talking to this infernal machine and I did not hit the damn record button. So there you go. It could be worse. I could be one of those poor schmucks on the front line being thrown into the meat grinder so rich people can get richer. But here I am in this privileged position to give you the news. I would much rather be here than there, but you never know when our number is going to get pulled. Let's just knock on wood. The way things are going, Western diplomats currently fleeing Israel as we speak with their families to surrounding countries, including Jordan, where right now you have the Israeli top military brass holed up in a nuclear bunker in the heart of the country. They're even opening up the bunkers near the Dimona nuclear facility. This is all in anticipation, of course, of the much anticipated, vaunted Iranian retaliatory strike that is still purely hypothetical, but that is not stopping the Israelis from already plotting preemptive strikes, of course, with the help of the Americans. And interestingly, Iran is putting its society into a state of suspended animation, it would appear, into a state of pseudo-lockdown, closing businesses. And here is the reason that they are providing, that they're going to be closing their businesses for the next 2 days. Interestingly, coincident with the closure of airspace, a notice to airmen going over the country for August 6th, 7th, and 8th. Now, they are attributing this to a rise in temperature. Now, from what I know, a 103 to 107 degree temperature is nothing out of the ordinary in the Middle East. In some places, depending on the time of year, that's considered very cool weather. So that they're saying that they're shutting down their society for that reason, I must surmise that the real reason is because they want to minimize panic within their population, because they are expecting a retaliatory strike to their retaliatory strike from the Americans and the Israelis, or they are in fact getting prepared because it indeed is Israel and the United States who are planning to go on the offensive first, and they're going to frame it as a preemptive strike. Of course, this is pretty much locked in now in the Lebanese front. Israel is talking as if it's a matter of fact that they are indeed going to strike preemptively in Lebanon, which, make no mistake, is the beginning, the official beginning of the Lebanon war. They're never going to tell you when they're starting wars, ever again. Even in the Gaza Strip, they didn't call it a war until, we were weeks into it. Even in Russia and Ukraine, they're still not calling it a war. That's not stopping the Ukrainians from doing a completely futile incursion into Russian territory once again today. As you're seeing on screen here, we're going to talk about this massive explosion that looked a lot like a nuclear mushroom cloud. I doubt it was, but perhaps we can implicate the F-16s in this one, which of course would be a major red line. But once again, the Ukrainians got the bright idea to do a purely Pyrrhic and propagandistic incursion into Russian territory in the Kursk region of all places. If you know your World War II history, you would know that this is where the Germans got turned around and everything was downhill from there in World War II. Now the Russia bros are in the corner cheering with glee, insisting that maybe this is the turning point of the conflict, because of course a Chechen commander on the Russian side is saying that this is Ukraine's last incursion into Russian territory, their last offensive, and is purely for the purpose of taking attention away from the fact that their front lines are collapsing, that they're throwing these guys into the meat grinder for no reason. And wouldn't it be poetic from the perspective of a Russia bro to have the Azov battalion, who appears to sympathize with that guy with the little mustache and the swastikas everywhere? Wouldn't it be poetic if they were stopped in the exact same place as they were in World War II? Well, that's what they're saying, but I'm not so convinced of that, because when you see Russian air bases going up in flames like this with massive explosions, clearly they must have hit an ammunition dump or something to create an explosion like that, because I don't think there's a bomb that the Iranians can fire that is going to have this type of explosion. I mean, that looks nuclear. Of course, it wasn't preceded with a bright flash, but the video doesn't start until later. You can see ammunition flying all over the place, so we can presume it was in fact an ammo dump, but it looks more like a gas explosion or something. But anyways, this is in the southern military district of Russia. If indeed the F-16 was in some way involved in this, which of course is a nuclear-capable platform, you can expect that you're going to see a massive Russian response. And the fact that the Russians are being so quiet, now that we know there's a secondary explosion there, so you know this likely was just an ammunition dump, still doesn't explain the magnitude of the initial explosion. We know that they're going to stage a massive response and that NATO has overstepped its boundaries. Once again, these are NATO pilots flying these F-16s. They're never going to admit to that, although they're slowly warming people to the idea that F-16 veterans in NATO countries are going to volunteer to fly these planes. So, you know, everything that I've been saying about that whole fiasco, about how this is the official beginning of the war between NATO and Russia, it's all going to come true, and it's all going to make sense in good time. Now, the reason why I'm bouncing between Ukraine and Iran is because the Russians have an arrangement with the Iranians. And I think that in an attempt to interdict this burgeoning relationship between the Russians and the Iranians, the Americans and the Israelis are saying, we got to go and we got to hit Iran hard now before they can acquire and put in place these weapon systems that are being delivered by the Russians. Now, if the Russians are delivering currently plane load after plane load of missile defense, of radars, of electronic warfare equipment, possibly the Su-35 nuclear-capable platform, the Su-35 planes that the Iranians have been awaiting delivery of for the longest time. They already have the trainers, they have pilots who are trained on these things. We can also presume that they're sending Russian soldiers there to help use this equipment, obviously. So this means that the relationship between the Russians and the Iranians is deepening. And remember what Vladimir Putin said. He said that if you continue to arm and enable Ukraine to target deep inside our territory with these advanced weapon systems, giving Ukraine the green light to target within a certain region of the border there, then we are going to respond in kind, and we are going to enable your adversaries with various advanced weapon systems that perhaps they don't possess, in an attempt to stymie your progress in whatever sort of imperialistic pursuits you might have, namely in the Middle East, I'm presuming, but this could also be in relation to what's going on in Cuba and Venezuela as well. But I think the most rational place that they could be speaking of at this point in time, and the place that makes the most sense, is somewhere in the Middle East. Many people thought it was Yemen, but it could just be Iran, and it could in fact be that the Russians are getting ready to prime Iran with the nuclear-capable Su-35 platforms, getting ready to potentially even give them nuclear weapons at some point in time. If Russia is being pushed to the brink, in which some people think they are, if this is one of their last moves before having to utilize nuclear weapons themselves, we've seen that they're willing to give nuclear weapons to Belarus. They could very easily do that with Iran. In fact, right now we must presume that they already have, and perhaps that is what all this theater is for, is to make the Americans and the Israelis second guess whether or not Iran even has nuclear weapons. However, and this is how I have arguments with myself, that would mean that they're not for the sake of deterrence, because in order for nuclear weapons to be utilized for deterrence, the other side has to know you have them and be threatened by them. It doesn't appear as though the preparations that are currently being made with Iran shutting down its society for 2 days over what there is moderate weather is an indication that they're expecting this situation to die down. They are expecting it to escalate. So in that case, you would expect that they would also be willing to disclose different types of weapon systems they had in order to prevent or cause, to discourage the United States and Israel from doing whatever it is they're getting ready to do and preempt these attacks. So it's an entangled web we weave around the world as we become more and more globalized, and this, of course, is the last Hail Mary of globalization. It's really now turning into a bipolar world. But as both sides become more entrenched and dig their heels in and develop those alliances, the more one theater of conflict is going to affect the other. This is a world war. Unfortunately, most people aren't going to call it that until the first nuclear weapon is detonated, and by then it's going to be far too late to prepare. So this is why you got to prepare for these things beforehand. So we have Ukraine turning it up. Basically, this is a statement that they're in no way ready to have any sort of copacetic relations with the Russians, that tensions are going to continue to mount. They're not serious about peace negotiations. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing these cross-border incursions into Kursk and targeting this deep into Russian territory. We have the assiduous preparations of the Iranian military currently keeping it on the down low, with the exception of the NATOMs and shutting down their society. There hasn't been a whole lot of missile movements that we've seen on the roadways there. What we've seen back in April, they're being very discreet about their intentions this time around. Of course, as I've said yesterday, Iran has the capability to launch everything from their bunkers, essentially. They roll out the thing, they shoot it off, and they bring it back into the bunker. So there's not going to be a whole lot of forewarning if and when they want to do this offensive. But there are speculations that are rooted in intelligence, open source intelligence, that might give us an indication of what they're exactly getting ready to do. So let's move through the data points here today again for the second time. I don't know what I've repeated because I just did this video, so I'm probably going to miss something. I might restate something, and that's just because shit happens, okay? So essentially, Israel is preparing a preemptive strike on Lebanon. I'm hearing that from a lot of different media agencies, including Israel Channel 12, that the IDF is now starting preparations to conduct a major wave of preemptive strikes on Hezbollah and the Islamic resistance in Iraq. They're already targeting Yemen, they're targeting Syria, they're, of course, assassinating people in Iran. They want a region-wide war, and it's not the Israeli people per se, but it's the Netanyahu government and the war cabinet there. They want a region-wide war, and it's very likely that the United States wants it as well, even though they're playing pretend and saying that we got to de-escalate the situation. Meanwhile, they're sending nuclear-capable stealth bombers, F-18s, F-22s, F-15s, and all of this military advanced equipment to the region in order to clearly get into a conflict with a near-peer adversary there within the region, be they Hezbollah or Iran. So it appears as though they're getting ready to declare war on Hezbollah. Because remember, this preemptive strike on Hezbollah would be a declaration of war, because they're saying that this strike will be of such a magnitude that it will cause the plans of Hezbollah to be shelled. Well, a strike of that magnitude is going to be a declaration of war. So they're not going to call it the official start of the Israeli-Hezbollah conflict, but it's eventually going to mission creep its way into that. They're going to do that. Hezbollah is going to respond, and they're going to say, well, now we need to create this demilitarized zone from here to the river, the 40 kilometers, and then they're eventually going to try to close that gap. It's not going to work because they can't even get the Gaza Strip under control. And now you have Sinwar in power, who's far more aggressive and far less willing to negotiate, which is, of course, exactly what Netanyahu wants. And it's just going to spiral out of control from here. So enjoy these lows in the oil market while they last, because anybody with half a brain right now knows that the Middle East is a powder keg, and one misplaced spark is going to send that entire place up in flames. The fact that Iran is shutting down its society for heat. Remember what they did in Ukraine before the war in Russia? This bears repeating, because this method is going to be replicated in every other theater of war from this point forward. Number one, they're never going to declare war. They're always going to try to minimize panic in their population by never alerting them that they're going to be attacked, because people would just be panicking. They would be going to the grocery stores. They would be clearing out. They'd be congesting the roadways. They would be congesting the telecoms. So they don't want people to do that. So they're just saying, it's just for heat. Now, I don't know the temperature on the ground in terms of the pulse of the public there in Iran, but I can presume that a lot of people are suspicious as to why, in fact, they are doing this. And of course, they're doing this to manage public panic. So there is a very good chance, from all accounts, be they U.S. officials, Israeli intelligence officials, that something is about to happen in the next 48, 72 hours. Now, I don't want to hear people casting aspersions about how, you always say 72 hours, this and that. What I report to you is what the intelligence officials are saying. I'm basically just parroting a lot of what they say with these 72-hour predictions, with the exception that I do give you my long game predictions in the form of my usual geopolitical analysis that I usually do on the channel. Excuse me. But when I say that they're expecting Iran to do something in the next 72 hours, that's based on the most sound intelligence that we have at any given moment, okay? So right now, as I've said, Israel is striking everywhere, trying to coax the entire region into a complete state of disarray. We have Lloyd Austin insisting that the attack that was injurious to American soldiers, recently 5 American casualties as a result of that, no deaths, I believe, but he is holding Iranian proxies responsible for those attacks yesterday. Right now, within the region, we have the accumulation of U.S. forces, the Navy, amphibious groups, Marines. We have 12 more USAF, U.S. Air Force F-22s arriving in the Royal Air Force Lakenheath base. They're going to be redeployed to the Middle East very soon. We have about a dozen F-A-18 fighter jets that are arriving at undisclosed bases throughout the Middle East. We have 2 B-1 nuclear-capable stealth bombers. We have 3 C-17 heavy military transport aircraft of the U.S. Air Force heading towards the Middle East, likely Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. And that's just today, okay? There's just a massive accumulation of force posture within that region that suggests that all hell is about to break loose. And now that you have the most extreme faction of Hamas in charge, there really is no prospect of ameliorating this situation. It is going to spiral out of control. For whatever reason, Iran, there is no way to redress their grievances, and they are now hell-bent on retaliating and not willing to negotiate even through third-party channels with the United States or Israel. And I'm actually kind of confused about that, because is this a sign that the Sunnis and the Shiites are actually uniting against the West? Of course, this has been exploited. This divide between Sunnis and Shiite countries has been exploited for the longest time, to the detriment, of course, of all Muslim countries when going up against the West. They simply get them fighting with one another. This has been the case with Saudi Arabia and Iran, of course, one of the most crucial enmities within the region. And of course, all throughout the region, the sectarian violence that ensues has always been the limiting factor in the Middle Eastern countries being able to resist the imperialist or colonialist onslaught of the West, framed from their point of view. I'm not saying that's necessarily what it is. Of course, there's mutual benefits within those relationships. The Saudis have become, monumentally wealthy beyond their wildest dreams as a result of the Western exploitation of their oil resources, but that's another story. Clearly, we're going on tangents here because this is the second time I've done this damn video, and I'm losing my voice, as you can tell. Now, I cannot understand why the Iranians were willing to commit to full-blown war, knowing the stakes are so high, knowing that the Israeli top brass is holed up in a nuclear bunker in the heart of that country, why would they be willing to risk this for the assassination of a Sunni leader, a Hamas leader, the Sunni leader? Why would they be willing to risk it all for that when they, of course, are Shiites? It just makes very little sense. It only makes sense if you really take seriously the rising threat of BRICS and this bipolar, also known as a multipolar world. I still think it's bipolar because it's increasingly bipolar. Everything eventually just becomes a duality, good and bad. Whether it's in politics, here we got 5 political parties. They all end up just forming coalitions against the other guy. So everything turns into a duality. What do they call it? A Hegelian dialectic, east versus west. That's what it's going to become. That's what it's always been. It's not going to be multipolar. It's going to be a duality. Ultimately, you have to pick a side. And, there was this prospect for peace with China brokering a deal between the Saudis and the Iranians. But it appears as though the Americans and the Israelis are trying to prevent that relationship from flourishing. So it looks as though that relationship is going to be tested when the Israelis and the Americans leverage military bases and airspace within those regions to either attack Iran or defend Israel from an attack against Iran, which Iran has stated is going to be, they're going to hold the countries who intervene in the conflict in any way, shape, or form, be it defensively or offensively. They're going to hold them responsible and possibly unleash their proxies on said countries, which is why I cannot understand why the price of oil is so damn low. Makes no sense unless they were planning for a global nuclear war. Because in that case, the price of oil on the global markets as traded in US dollars is really insignificant, okay? And you're going to see an economic slowdown and everything's going to just be about pure total war, military mobilization, industrialization, no more conspicuous consumption, so you're not going to need all the excess oil that we burn frivolously with our conspicuous consumption. So it leads me to believe that perhaps the price of oil is so low because what's coming is going to be so bad that it's going to cause such a massive economic slowdown in the world that oil is just actually going to be abundant for at least a short period of time. Because the Middle East right now, we're literally one shot away from all hell breaking loose. Remember what Zhirinovsky, the Russian prophet, the guy who predicted the exact date of the Ukrainian invasion, the exact date as well as many other things. He predicted that in 2024, the horrors that we were going to see unfold in Iran were going to make what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine look like an overture, okay? Look like child's play. Now, what we're seeing in Ukraine and Russia is extreme. 50,000, 100,000 casualties a month. If you take the upper estimates of both sides and combine them, you're talking like 100,000 casualties a month. Okay, that's not including all of the civilian residual casualties, and the cost of this conflict is just through the roof. Thank God that the powers that be are trying to prevent it from going nuclear, because it should have gone nuclear a long time ago. So this is how everything relates, guys. Everything is all connected. What Russia is doing right now is attempting to embolden the Iranians to get into a shooting match with the Americans and the Israelis so that they can divert attention away from the European theater, allow the Russians to make some much anticipated progress on the front there, push NATO out of Ukraine, which of course I just don't think is going to happen. I think what NATO is trying to do right now is keep the fight in a bit of a stalemate of sorts until they can get this Middle Eastern situation sorted out. If they wanted to, they could easily enable the Ukrainians to strike deeper into Russia. And in fact, the Ukrainians have said as much. They've been complaining that we could easily strike these air bases, which of course is what we're seeing behind us here today, if they had the means to do so. So the question is, when will they be empowered with those means to do so? And what is the retaliation of Russia going to be before they go to the nuclear level? Well, I would think that it would probably be enabling the Iranians to go to war and to actually have a fighting chance against the Americans and the Israelis. That's what I suspect is going down on that front. I already talked about the evacuation happening from Israel. This is concerning because, you know, seeing diplomats being evacuated from Lebanon is one thing, but when they're talking about evacuating diplomats and their families from Israel, yet as far as I know, there is not a no travel advisory for that country yet. There is advisories that you might want to reconsider travel, but there is no do not travel advisory to Israel right now, which of course is the level 4 advisory, which basically signals that war is imminent, as is the case in Lebanon right now, as Israel prepares to go on the offensive within that region. So it's telling you that things are going to get very, very bad. The Dimona nuclear facility, or the municipality surrounding that facility, is opening up its shelters at the request of residents. And even though there's no new guidelines by the Homefront Command, but this is actually being requested by the residents of that region as they are expecting an attack on that nuclear facility. Now, Hezbollah, the leader, Nasrallah, has stated today that if Israel decides to do this preemptive strike, which is, as I've already stated, a declaration or initiation of the conflict officially between Hezbollah and Israel, that this is what they're going to do. They're going to target chemical factories worth $31 billion. They're going to target technology factories worth $76 billion. They're going to target power plants worth $10 billion. I presume they might be referring to the nuclear power plant in Dimona, which of course would be a violation of the Geneva Convention. I don't think they're going to care about that at this point, but that would of course provide the license for Israel in the minds of the international community, at least that part of it that's aligned with the West, the justification they need to actually use tactical nuclear weapons in Lebanon. In fact, I think that Israel, that would be the biggest gift you could give them, was to in some way attack the Dimona nuclear power plant, even though we know that those things are built pretty tough. I presume the one in Israel, of all places, is going to be built to withstand your types of cruise missiles that would be in possession by Hezbollah, but we could be wrong. In fact, I don't even think it would necessarily take a nuclear radiological incident. I think it would just be an attempt on that facility would be enough for Israel to say, hey, we're being attacked from all directions, we got to use nukes, so let's normalize the use of tactical nuclear weapons so everybody around the world can partake in the radiological fun. Food factories as well are on the chopping block, according to Nasrallah, worth up to $12 billion. He says these factories have taken decades to be built and can be destroyed in 1 hour or even half an hour. And of course, the response time to an onslaught from Lebanon is going to be much slower than from Iran. So they're not going to have as much time to prepare, which is why everybody is on standby to get to the bunkers as quickly as possible. I forgot to mention that in addition to the shutting down of Iranian society in the next couple days and the notice to airmen, they're also doing live fire exercises. So they're advising pilots to avoid low altitude flights. Now, there is some intelligence to suggest that right now the Iranian armed forces are conducting military exercises, which could just be a smoke screen for launching an offensive, as well as moving ballistic missiles and missile arm launchers around the country, indicating preparations for an impending attack on Israel. But again, Iran doesn't have to do this. They simply open up the missile silos that are nuclear proof, and they roll out the missiles and they fire them, and then they put them back into the bunker. It's as simple as that. They don't really have to go anywhere. They're not moving artillery and missile around. You don't really have to do that because, of course, you're launching at a place that is 1,500 miles away. It doesn't matter if you do it here or 100 miles away. You're just pulling them out of the bunker, putting them back in the bunker. It's as simple as that. So it's looking as though they're not telegraphing what their next move is going to be, and they're expecting that this is going to be a synchronized attack from all sides, with Hezbollah, Yemen, possibly Syria, and the Iranian-backed Iraqi militia paramilitary groups doing some sort of coordinated attack at once. Now, I would expect that Hezbollah would try to exhaust and deplete the missile defense capabilities of Israel and its allies who are currently within the region waiting to get the shoot-down orders. That you would exhaust those first with your smaller arms, your smaller munitions, your smaller rockets and cruise missiles that can be fired by the axis of resistance. And then, of course, you get Iran coming in with the big guns, the heavy hitters, possibly even the hypersonics and the ballistic missiles. I think that's what's going to happen. And in fact, many analysts are thinking that that's exactly what is going to happen as well. And that's what it appears as though they're preparing for. Just to give you a bit more specific information with respect to the closures, all government offices and facilities, as well as banks across the Tehran and Al Borz provinces of central Iran, will be closed tomorrow, with authorities claiming a significant rise in temperature for the closures. Iran's axis may target high-profile sites as the Knesset, the Prime Minister's office in Israel, IDF headquarters, Mossad headquarters, and/or Air Force and IDF intel bases. Other potential targets include power plants, seaports, and airports, and the aforementioned critical infrastructure that was threatened to be targeted by Nasrallah. According to senior American officials, the time for preventing an Iranian strike against Israel has now passed. Isn't that insane? So it's all getting ready to go. There is an organization of the Islamic Cooperation tomorrow, which is there today, I believe. So that's happening right now. So if anything is going to happen, it is going to happen after this plenary meeting of 57 different Muslim countries, where Iran is going to attempt to get some support for what's about to happen, I believe. One last ditch diplomatic Hail Mary before all hell breaks loose. Of course, the United States continues to try to make the case for an attack on Iran by implicating Iran in the Trump assassination attempt. Not the one that actually happened, but the fictitious one that they just made up and said may have happened. And of course, it was a Pakistani guy who was going to be doing this, and they're saying that he has ties to Iran. So they're finding a way to blame the Trump assassination attempt on Iran because they're trying to make a case to go to war. They pretty much have everything they need. All they need right now is for Iran to target Israel, which seems inevitable at this point in time. I think I've covered all the bases today. Is Ukraine going to be successful in their invasion of Kursk? Will they do what Hitler couldn't do, which was take down the Russians in Kursk? I have a sneaking suspicion that they're not. But you just never know at this point in time. All this stuff, we just never know. The fog of war is so thick. This could be where they put all their marbles. There's even suspicions that they might go for the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant once again. Guys, the market crash is still in its infancy. You always see what's called a dead cat bounce after you see a significant correction that we've seen in the last 72 hours. The Japanese government at the time of making this video says they refuse to hike interest rates. They're holding out. This is causing a little bit of a bounce, which doesn't really make it, it's macroeconomics is so confusing. Macroeconomists, they're always right and they're always wrong. If you're chalking this up to the carry trade, you're right and you're wrong. If you're chalking it up to unemployment statistics going up marginally, you're right and you're wrong. If you're chalking it up to the US debt bubble, if you're chalking it up to the deficit, you're always right and you're always wrong on a long enough timeline. So all you need to know is that every indicator is most certainly flashing red. The most elite among us, from Berkshire Hathaway to Jeff Bezos are divesting. I mean, Berkshire sold Apple, okay? I mean, they sold Apple. That was one of Warren Buffett's crown jewel stocks, and he sold, I believe, a significant portion of their position there. So the shit's hitting the fan, guys, which is why I'll leave you on this note, because all hell is breaking loose domestically, especially if you live, actually, I don't have I closed the window out, so you know what, we're going to forget it. I was going to suggest that you go out and you get yourself a product that is going to help you protect your home against thugs and hooligans who will likely be beating it down as austerity sinks in, but I'm going to save that for tomorrow's video. This is an excellent device that you should add to your preps. I'm just going to post a link to it in the description below, but I'm going to go into more depth tomorrow because I use several of these in my home. We've reviewed it on the channel before. It's a very simple way to prevent people from kicking in your door, okay? Yes, kicking in your door. That has practical utility, and it also has SHTF utility. If you want to get yourself a dooricade system, go down and check out the link in the description below. This is easy to install. It is very discreet. It is very wife-friendly, okay? And it is going to keep your family safe, most importantly, especially as we enter these precarious times ahead. Thank you for watching, my friends. I'm going to go get a drink of water, and I'm just going to hope that no major black swan has happened upon the second run through this video recording. Thanks for watching, guys. Take care.